and I magnify your name. How sweet the name of Jesus is. Oh yeah. Cause you came to my rescue. Yeah, yeah.
Gospel 88.7 WEHA. It's more than music. It's ministry.
WEHA, Port Republic, Atlantic City. And now on FM translator 100.3 W262CF.
Out front with Bishop John Gandy and Pastor Josh Kennedy. I want to welcome our guest on listeners to WEHA 88.7 and 100.3 FM in Atlantic City. That's in South Jersey, for those of you who are on Facebook Live. And also, we want to welcome our Facebook Live viewers. This program is a program that has really was birthed out of a ministry, I should say, that has really birthed out of a need, a very timely need. And we are our aim is to come together as people of God, as men of God, people of God, and having conversations about all the obvious tensions that the nation is facing, that the world is facing. Our aim is to heal, to bring us unity and healing to the body of Christ, and to lead the way in healing for the world. So that's what this is really all about, and we're excited about it. So with me today is my co-host, Pastor Josh Kennedy, and Pastor Andy Sorace is our very special guest and friend today. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So, Pastor Kennedy, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute. You can, you can say what you want to say and introduce Pastor Andy. Bring him on formally.
Amen. Yes.
I think we just. So anyway, again, I think we're just going live. So I want to welcome everyone again to our program. To the Out Front with Bishop John R. Gandy and Pastor Josh Kennedy. My guest today again is Pastor Andy Sorace. So welcome, pastors, and I'll turn it over to Pastor Josh.
Hey, it's a blessing to be with you, Bishop, and good to have Pastor Andy, our good friend, on with us today. Some of you might have been tuning in thinking you're going to hear from Bishop Harry Jackson, and this is Out Front, and Bishop Harry Jackson is very out front right now, national level. And he got risked out of the country suddenly for, don't know exactly what, but it was a suddenly type thing. And he does want to reschedule, so he'll be back hopefully sometime in the near future. But earlier today, I was talking to Pastor Andy, and Pastor was telling me some of the changes God's been doing in his heart. You know, I've been witnessing the same in my church, a very multicultural church, and a lot of Caucasian people have been coming to me and telling me how their hearts have been changing. Just a lot of it more just not knowing. I think this has been a time of education. You know, there's not a lot of good education historically in our country. It's very not fair how much in the African American history is not placed in our history in our schools. So I think this has been a life lesson, educational lesson for a lot of Caucasians, including myself. I've learned a lot myself, more in depth on the African American experience. And Pastor Andy, you were telling me God's really been doing a shift in your heart, and just wanted you to share more about that.
Well, thank you, first of all, Josh, and thank you, Bishop, for having me. I know we have done many shows together.
Yes.
And with the recent things that have been going on in our country and maybe even the world, you can't help but start to examine your own thoughts and examine, am I right on this? Am I right on that? And start to really dig deep. And so one of the biggest changes I feel that has happened is that I realize that racism isn't a personal thing. That racism is something that is built into our systems and our culture. And even though I could be very good friends with African American people and they can be very good friends with me, that doesn't mean there isn't a racist problem in the country and in the systems that have been built way before you or I have been born. And so I think what's been exposed is some of the systems that are just not really fair, or just is a better word, for all people. And so my thought was always, hey, I have black friends, I get along with black people, what's the problem? And It's much deeper than that. It's that I could be best friends with a black person, but then I can't help them get a mortgage, or maybe they can't move into the same community as I live in, or things like that. And so I'm seeing a much deeper racist issue in our country that is really not a personal one. It's more a business racism or an economic racism, and so that's much harder to fix actually, because as Christians, I love everybody the same, and I'm sure you do, Bishop. But we can't help everybody the same because there's systems that are set up that will not allow that. And so I think that's what our job as the church is now, is to try to not just expose these systems, but try to help bring justice into them. And part of that is the seven mountain mandate, is that we get men and women of God of all colors into the tops of these mountains where they can make decisions, because supposedly what the statistic is that the top 3% of every mountain makes all the decisions. So if we don't have men and women in the top 3%, most of these decisions are ungodly ones. And so this is something that as Christians we could do now, is start to aspire to get into those seven mountains. That's why we need, I'm sure growing up like I did, Bishop, you and I are almost the same age. I might have a few years on you. But we were told if you want to serve God, you got to go to the church. You got to go to Bible school and be a minister. That was pretty much your only choice. Wow. And so everybody ended up in the church, even the ones that didn't belong there. We got lawyers that are pastors. We got doctors that are pastors. We got carpenters and politicians, and they're all pastoring because they're all told the same thing.
Some are pastoring from the pews.
That too. So I think getting into the seven mountains should be the mandate of the church, to start to change around some of these cultural bad decisions.
Yeah, let me just say, Pastor Andy, let me say, first of all, that this is, having this conversation, we talked earlier before we came on the air, we were talking about how you and I and Pastor Josh and others have been having conversations and talking and disagreeing about a lot of things for a lot of years, but we have been able to maintain relationship and friendship and continue to have conversation, have dialogue. I like to have, to engage people, because I know that in most instances, it's about us coming to an understanding before we can have agreement. Agreement is necessary because we have differences, and we have to come to a place of agreement, and that means that we have to talk. And I'm happy that we have been able to talk. We have been on opposite sides of these conversations and others for a long time, but we've had honest, respectful, healthy discussions and conversations, both of us wanting to come to a point of understanding. So I think this is a testimony as to, this is why I'm saying this is a testimony as to what Christ-like love is about. It's what it does, what it can do in our hearts. And not just your heart is changing, my heart's changed as well. I have learned a tremendous amount about about why you feel the way you feel, and why you the way you think, and I understand it better, and I respect it, and I want to be very, very sensitive to that, because if we're not sensitive to each other's positions, we'll just have continue to be on opposite ends of the spectrum, arguing about that make no sense. So I'm very happy, so the love of God is conquers all. Amen. And there are many other people whose hearts have been touched, I believe, as they come to a greater understanding. And understanding that we, first of all, understand that we are not enemies. We're all in this thing together. We're all, those of us who are in the church, we're in the body of Christ. But those who are not in the church, we're all in this country together. We all go up together. We go down together. Either the country prospers. If it prospers, we all can, prosper and do well. We're trying to fix the issues of systemic racism so that there is equality, and we all have an equal opportunity at prospering. But at the end of the day, it's so refreshing that people all over the country are having these kinds of conversations, and people's hearts are coming together, and people are beginning to see what they perhaps, before just were unable to see, unwilling to see, or just had no reason to see, in their world. So, so God works in mysterious ways, and we're just praying now that at the end of all of this, that something wonderful and supernatural happens, and the love of God spreads. And as you said, that the people of God will continue to grow and to impact the nation. So I want to thank you for coming on and having this testimony. It's a testimony, as to the power of God. So we're thankful for that. Praise God.
Proverbs 4:7 says, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with it, get understanding.
Yes.
And I think that's what a lot of, people of all colors are getting, understanding. I know I didn't have this understanding a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. I didn't have this understanding. And it was almost like God just lifted a veil and said, here's the problem, and I said, oh, okay. I didn't see that. I didn't. When you used to use that word a lot, systemic racism, and I didn't really understand what you were meaning. You know what I mean? I know what that means, but I couldn't really put it together. And all of a sudden, it just started to come together that this is an economic racism. This is a business racism. This goes way before you, me, and probably our parents, where there was designs made to hold back certain groups, certain different ethnic groups, including, of course, African Americans, mostly really. And so first we got to really find out where these things are, what mountains they're in, and then we got to hope to change the top of those mountains. Lawmakers, have to be involved, obviously, and the church. I said to you before we just went on air, if the church can't figure this out, how can the world figure it out? If we don't have victory over this, how can the world ever hope to have victory over this? So, go ahead.
I'm glad you said that, because as we talk about, so now where do we go from here, right? I want to ask you two questions. The first question I want you to answer for me is, explain, what challenges you may think. Can you explain what people who don't see it, what their challenges may be? What are the things that we're missing in terms of reaching those people? And then secondly, I want to talk to you about how we can join together and leverage our the love of God and the power of God and our influence, but we need to stand together and begin now to have meetings with and influence our legislators and our congressmen, and we're going to talk about how we want to do that in a minute. But first, can you just explain, how might we reach people who don't see it? What are some of the challenges thinking of people who don't see it?
Well, most of the time that I've heard the word systemic racism, it just sounded like a dark hole, like, what in the world are they talking about? Like, I didn't really, you know what I mean? But when I started reading about redlining, when I started reading about how mortgages were given out maybe to the wrong people because they really couldn't afford to keep it, and just things that were being done to hurt people or to keep people back or out of neighborhoods or out of school districts. Now I understand school districts. I understand mortgages. I understand what redlining means. And although redlining is illegal at this point, it's still kind of there. And so there's illegal redlining, but then there's also kind of like, there's still ways that you can do things in the world, as you know, that you still get away with it. And so I think when we say systemic racism, we should describe exactly what that means, how it affects economies, how it affects families. If a family can't live in a good neighborhood, most likely they don't have good school districts. If they don't have good school districts, they most likely won't get educated. They might drop out. Well, now they lead to a life of crime or doing things not in a proper way, and they're in trouble. And the list just goes on and on.
So you're saying that for the most part, many white Americans were just totally unaware of the plight of African Americans in terms of aware that there's something wrong, but just not really clear about what is the real cause of this problem that we see African Americans experiencing.
I think most white Americans feel racism as a personal thing. And if I can get along with black people, I'm not racist.
Right.
And I'm not racist, but I do admit there's a racist problem. And there's a problem for the black culture that I don't have. I can go and into certain places, get certain things that my good friend that might be black can't do. That's the problem.
Yeah, and that's it. So I've been talking about systemic racism for many years, because I've understood it, and I study it and I live it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So,
and I didn't understand that.
Yeah, and I also knew, thank God, I also knew, I felt in my heart that we have to have conversation. That's why I've always made it my business to reach out to people of different beliefs, different persuasions, different ethnicities, and so forth, so that we can, because you got to have communication. And
Right.
if you're the love of God, we have to be able to. If we can't talk, as you said, Pastor,
Absolutely.
if we can't talk, then who can? We have some
Right.
people on Facebook Live. Let's see. Elizabeth Lieli Rich says people's hearts must open up. I believe that happens when people share their stories. Absolutely. And that is so very, very true. Steve Forte says, agree. I'm not sure what he's agreeing to yet, but we'll see. We need to explain what systemic racism actually means, step by step. Absolutely.
Yes.
True. By the way, someone said, Dr. Smith says, Pastor Andy, such an incredible testimony, Pastor Surace.
Amen. Amen. It wasn't hard. My heart was never hard. It was just veiled. It didn't see what I'm talking about now. I could always love you or any of my black brothers or sisters, but I didn't know you needed more than just love. And this is where I think a lot of white people are just, they don't realize racism is not a personal thing always. There are some racists that do not like the other color.
Sure.
We're not going to deny that. But usually within the church, I would hope to think that's not the issue, although I'm sure it is in some places. But so if I had black friends, I was good. If I could get along with black, I was raised in a black school, and I worked a job with all black people around me. Well, how could I be racist? I got along with everybody.
Some of my best friends are black. What do you mean?
Exactly, and I'm sure you've heard that many times. Yeah, and so we got to get past the personal racism to the racism, and maybe racism isn't the right word, and maybe that's something that could get changed, because again, the minute anybody hears racism, the first thing they're thinking of is, we don't like you, and it's way more than we don't like you.
Right, that's correct. So racism is the right word. Our definition of racism is,
we got to make a clear definition.
Yeah. So racism is indeed that system that has been designed,
yes,
based on race. But most people think it's about hate and love.
Right.
It isn't that at all. Now, unfortunately, I think there are people who use that to keep people divided. And we have to, we acknowledge, that's why I can talk to, I love everybody. I don't dislike anyone because they may not see it yet.
Right.
It's us really, really having conversation and talking about what that means. So thank you for, Pastor Josh, you as well. Can you, help us out and let us know what it is about people that we may not understand, African Americans and those who may have taken this position. What might help us to better communicate with people who don't understand it without us necessarily going automatically, knee-jerk fashion to pushing the button of calling people just simply being racist. And as I've said many times, most of us are racist, if not all of us, but we just don't know it.
Yeah, prejudice.
Josh.
A lot of us have prejudice, but a lot of it comes from ignorance. If we've been born again, we've had a change of heart. God is changing our heart. It's not the same as it used to be. And we don't have a place, if Jesus is Lord of our life, to have prejudice in our heart. God's removing that, but a lot of ignorance is still there. Just not a lack of understanding. The Good Samaritan, one thing you can just pass somebody by and ignore them. It's another thing to see them and actually go over to them and comfort them. But then the third level is actually when you take them and help them and see what the problem really is. And that's what we see with the Good Samaritan. And I think that's where we've fallen short as Christians, because this is our nation. It's not your people problem. And I still hear that from other Christians, which is horrible. That's your problem as black people. We're of a kingdom, and we're all one. And therefore, It's all of our problems.
That's right.
And our job as God's people is to bring heaven on earth. And so anything we see in this nation that's not right, it's our duty. So we can't ignore this duty as that's their problem. I'll stay on my side, you stay on your side, you deal with your own problems. You learn to adjust to us if you want to step into our side. That's completely non-kingdom thinking. Kingdom thinking is how do we help everyone? That everyone has equal share, equal opportunity, and that we are part of the solution. We're lifting our brothers up. We're supporting them. We're comforting them. When we had the first program, not on the radio here, but on the Facebook Live, and we had multiple guests, a lot of my, different people that I heard from had a difficult time, especially hearing from you, Bishop Gandy, and from Q, and people who were tired, very tired. And one thing I told them was, just this last Sunday when I was preaching, I said, how are we supposed to respond when somebody's tired biblically, with the heart of God? You don't just say, what's wrong with you? You don't just get angry with them. No, you reach out to them and you hear them out and you be a support for them. Those who are strong are called to help those who are weary. Not to look at those who are weary and just push them down even further and say, how dare you be tired? You have no right to be tired. We are, as human beings, will all face being tired at some point in our life. And we hope that somebody will be there to give us the strength that we don't have. And so that is the kingdom response, is when you see somebody weak and you have some level of strength, you give what they don't have right now, so that when you are weak, likewise, they'll probably do the same for you. And that's the kind of attitude we need to have. But for whatever reason, this particular time, this situation, the way it happened and the way it was put on television, with over and over again, replayed over and over again, I've heard a lot of Caucasians are finally listening to people's stories and listening to the facts of how our nation is, and people like Pastor Andy, regarding just not fully knowing systemic racism, seems to be clicking. So to me, it gives me a lot of hope. Of course, we need to see change. Doesn't it seem like there's a deadlock regarding President Trump and the proposal that they brought forward, and I don't know if it's going to be any change much in legislation, but at least from a Christian perspective, Christians' hearts are changing.
Well,
White America is changing.
Yeah, that's the first step. But until it is manifested in legislation, nothing really changes.
Correct.
That's that's the main point. And of course, seeing people protest, hearing people be very, very direct, like myself, I intentionally have to speak in very clear terms, have to speak truth so people can understand. In the church, in some ways, and I'll describe it like this: people don't understand that people are asleep, right? And you don't wake people up by singing lullabies and kumbaya and singing songs. People are awakened. If the church is sleeping, it has to be awakened with truth, and has to be awakened. And that sometimes that truth has to be jarring. It has to be something that is very, very. It has to be jarring. It's to wake you up. So we can't wake up by just coming together and singing and acting as if the reality of the situation doesn't exist. If we continue to do that, we'll never wake up. So it takes these. God knows what's needed, and of course, God speaks that way. God is love, but when God deals with people who are asleep, or people who are in error, or people who are in sin, God speaks to them sometimes. Of course, it's always love. It's the first. It's soft. Not love. Soft, gentle, reaching out. The hand is always there, but when we don't receive God's love in that soft, gentle way, it takes other kinds of things like a virus, or a pandemic, or something that has to grab our attention, and is the voice of God. And one thing we don't want God to speak really in that way. So we're better off to hear the word of God and to let our heart be touched. I'll say this also. This also, I think, for me, it begins to, it's very telling about our Christianity, because many of us profess to be Christians, but we don't have in our hearts the compassion that we should have toward people who are oppressed, that we're commanded to have. toward people who are oppressed. And I think to your point earlier, Pastor Andy, of course, some people just simply did not recognize that people were being oppressed. So and that is it's kind of strange. That's the part that's kind of strange for me, but I'm not in your shoes. But so some people don't see that. How do you not see the oppression? Is what some people would say.
Well, first of all, like, I didn't have a change of heart. I had a change of mind. And there's a difference. I've always loved people of any color. The love of God is in me to love people.
No question.
I just didn't get the mind part. I think we need to inform people, and especially when you talk to white people who are in this generation, let's just say, we've just seen a black president. Some of the most, you turn on a basketball game, everybody on there is multimillionaire, and 70% of them are black. We don't see a lot of oppression, and we didn't do any of the things that our forefathers did. So I think when you explain it to them, it's got to be explained in baby steps, because the first thing that happens is, wait a minute, I didn't have any slaves, or I didn't do this wrong, or I have a lot of good friends that are black. And it's just, and we're sincere, we mean it. We didn't do those things. So informing gently and methodically and small bits and pieces, it makes perfect sense. Now, if you can't accept the perfect sense that it makes, then maybe you got a heart problem.
Yeah.
But if you just needed your information to get corrected, then if the heart's right, it's easy. And to me, like I said, I think a lot of Christian white men and women need change of minds, not change of hearts. They love black people. They just don't understand why they're being attacked in a way now for something they didn't do. And what do you mean you're oppressed? You had a black president, you had this, you had that. Well, then you start talking about, well, I can't get a mortgage as easy as you. I can't live in certain neighborhoods. I get turned down on jobs, or we get paid less on a job than a white guy, or whatever the case may be.
My children are afraid of the police. My children, so that's terrorism. So there's a lot that goes into it that's very ugly, and those truths are hard to hear, but those are the things that just have to be shared and said so people really understand the intensity of this whole thing. And it is not intended to be offensive. It's intended just to say it's the truth. It's really
just how it's delivered.
Yeah.
If it's delivered, just these are the facts, this is the problem. You can either accept it as truth or not. Now, if they don't, that's a problem. But I think most Christian Caucasian or white people, once they understand what we're talking about here, it's not a heart matter. It's oh, really? You got a hard time getting a mortgage, or your children are afraid of the police? I mean, I've never feared the police.
Yeah.
Even a black cop. I never feared a black cop.
The irony is, you see it every day, but you don't see it. I mean, it's on the news and it's whatever. But anyway, so that's why I think sometimes it takes things that are really, really more jarring for people to just kind of put me reality. Back when Dr. King, during the Civil Rights Movement, one of the reasons why Dr. King used nonviolence and not invited in, but hoped for television cameras to be there, because it exposed what he knew people did not see.
Mm-hmm.
So today we have the internet and we have the cell phones and all that. It just exposes what people would never know, myself included. I'm a 50-something-year-old African American man. I don't have the same experiences as a 19-year-old African American child.
Right.
And so I also need it's jarring to me. I need to have those realities. I had the experiences, but for African Americans, I think it's such a common thing until it's just the way you live. It's not even, unfortunately, for some time, it's not even that alarming. It's just it's a weird, normal thing, and but it's so unjust and so wrong and so damaging until it has to be corrected. Let me read someone else from online. Says Evangelist Beverly Bell Smith says, "How will heaven look because we all are in the image of God? What does that look like?" Is what she was saying, a typo. What does that look like? Love is what it looks like, she says, and I certainly agree with that. Candace Williams says, you didn't do it, but you still benefit from it. And that's kind of the issue. And that's where the rub comes, right? That's where the rub comes.
I guess, it's hard to, again, when you get raised, just like you got raised in one culture, we have, as white people, we've been raised in a different culture, very different. And so what you get used to becomes invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And what becomes common, you don't see after a while. So we get raised one way, this is just life. What are you talking about? We don't understand. And of course, you have the same thing, only opposite.
Yeah.
You may get an opposite reaction to a mortgage broker or a real estate agent or an employer.
Well,
so
black people, Andy, like you, black people don't know oftentimes that they're being discriminated against. That's only something that we come to know when you begin to read statistics. You would think that everyone who has the same job that you have and the same credit rating that you have would qualify for the same loan. If I were turned down, if you went, I would assume you would be turned down. I would never know you were not turned down.
Right.
If it were not for statistics and documentation, it comes out later on and it says, wait a minute, here's what's happening. Here's the reality. The reality is here are two people who look alike on paper, except for their rate.
Right.
One is the mortgage, the other doesn't. Why? What is the difference in these two people? And the difference simply is their race. That's when we come to know it. We don't know it when you fill out the application, when you're doing the interview, when you don't know that you're being, in any way being discriminated against at that time. That comes out later on.
You mentioned Dr. King, and I think Dr. King spoke to a different level of racism. I think he spoke to the most outward level of racism, hatred by white people. I don't think he really even understood the idea of systemic racism like we do today anyway. So his idea is we all need to get along together. We all just need to love one another. But it's hard to get along when you can't do the same thing person of another color can do with the same abilities and the same equal, ratings, let's say.
So quite the contrary.
All right, tell me.
Dr. King understood this whole thing better than most people understood it. He understood that there were different levels of attack, if you will, of approach.
Okay.
So he wanted to have nonviolence because, number one, being violent, you would just simply lose. Number one.
Okay.
Also, nonviolence demonstrated publicly that we're not antagonizing these people.
Right.
They are simply terrorizing and brutalizing us without cause. That message rang out all over the world, just as we see young people today, because I think most people would think, if you're being arrested by the police, you did something wrong. If you're being killed by the police and they said you had a gun, then you had a gun. If they said their life were in danger, they felt they were in danger, you simply believed it until you have the camera that shows you the truth.
Right.
So Dr. understood the power of that image, number one. But Dr. King also was working, and one reason why he was he was a threat, not because he was talking about white people, hatred between the races. He was a threat because he began to talk about systemic ideas. The Poor People's Campaign is what really was most threatening to the system, to society. You should read about that.
The Poor People's Campaign.
Yes, he had a coalition of multi-ethnic, multicultural people who were coming together to do another march on Washington, D.C., but this time it was not going to be just black people. It was going to be a coalition of poor people. And that was more of a threat to the system than people simply saying black folk out there. So Dr. King he's the one who educated the rest of us.
Okay.
So,
I've never heard, like, all his famous quotes and everything are more about, personal. Dr. King. What's that?
I was saying to Josh, you can jump in anytime.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. Yeah, I actually learned that not long ago from a documentary on Netflix or one of them regarding that's really what brought the death of Martin Luther King was when he started tackling the whole poverty issue as a whole and how it affected all groups. One thing I wanted to share was what Sharon William Miller wrote here on Facebook Live. If white evangelicals be willing to stand together in agreement that equality is for all race, then join forces with the people of color to convince legislators that we will not tolerate being unfairly treated any longer. We are created equal and required to be treated the same. We now have a voice. This must be corrected. So I think that is one key thing that she just wrote. White evangelicals we see have a lot of pull. And a big part of why President Trump is in the White House is because of white evangelicals. And if he's going to stay in the White House will depend upon white evangelicals. And now white evangelicals get really behind certain aspects, which is, pro-life. And President Trump has really done a lot regarding that thing. They get really behind the state of Israel. President Trump has done a lot regarding that, and legislation and all kinds of things. Regarding marriage, President Trump has talked a lot about that during his administration. But if white evangelicals would just as much, equally, or more, because this is such a huge problem, bring this stuff up. If white evangelicals would join with the black church, and we would equally come alongside and support, equality in this country for all, then I think legislation would have to move. Legislation has done a lot because of white evangelicals. So we see the power that white evangelicals have in the White House. So therefore, if they could make this something that they discuss, make this something that they press through and join alongside and bring forth, then change could actually take place by the church. But we cannot be divided, white evangelicals and black church. We need to become one.
It's going to take, I think, for that to happen, some national leaders of black and white coming together. I mean, we do our little part here, but we're not national leaders. But I think we need to start to see national, and I think it might be starting to happen, like with Harry Jackson and some other national black leaders, as well as some national white leaders coming together. I'd love to see Franklin Graham jump in on this thing, who's got a national voice. And because it's going to take people bigger than I and you to maybe make this happen, but it starts in the little pockets. And
right.
And we've been talking for years.
That's right. But it starts in little pockets, and the truth of it, Andy, is this: it starts at this level. So that's why. So the second question I had posed to you, or the topic I wanted to bring up with you, is talk about what is the next step, right? How do we now take our little effort and use it, leverage it, and make it become more powerful? And that is very, very doable. It is by doing what we've been saying, what I've been saying all these weeks, is we come together and we join forces. We work with and we influence, leverage our collective power, and have conversations with legislators, with congresspersons. They will hear us. They will hear us more clearly and more loudly as a coalition. I talk with legislators often, so do many other African Americans as well, about these issues. But it's a lot more powerful when they see us united, particularly Christians. When they see us united together. And when I get back, I've already made some calls and some that kind of thing. And when I get back, I've been on vacation, but I haven't been just sleeping. I've been praying and before the Lord and
right.
asking for direction. And when I get back, I've reached out to some people already, some pastors already. We want to come together and begin to talk about that next step and how we to really take the front as we as pastors and the coalition can come together and use this platform, Pastor Andy and Pastor Josh, to be a lot more effective. We're not just doing this to just have a conversation among ourselves.
Right.
We're doing that change.
Right.
And we're going to do just that. So don't think that this is just a small conversation. This is a big conversation.
No, I didn't mean that. But yes, I get what you're saying. But what I'm saying is, after we do our part, we need some national leaders to do the same thing.
Oh, they will. And this is how it all works. So they're already doing their part. They're doing what they do at that level. We do at our level, and the two come together. And that's how it always works. So we just do our part, And believe me, it's doing our part that has brought us into the on the radar, and have an opportunity to have a Bishop Harry Jackson to even respond. It's doing our part. If we do nothing, if we're not faithful in the little and small, then no one's going to trust you with the larger. So our part is do what we're doing, what we've been doing for a number of years, and and so God is going to use it to do some incredible things, I believe.
Amen.
Let me read from another Facebook comment here. Steve Forte says, "If you hang with black person, you should notice." And by the way, I don't read them before I read them. I just read them. So whatever it says, it says. If you hang with black people, a black person, you should notice how you are treated differently with that person. That's right. That's the racism even some blacks don't see. That's very, very true. And Bill Hawk, Deacon Hawk says of WEHA, he says, systemic racism will always see equality as something they have the right to pass out at their discretion. Equality is God-given. That is absolutely right. And that speaks to my point. I think last week we talking with another pastor, Pastor Walter, and I made a comment. We talk about progress and about black people getting, we're making allowances and different programs and all that. I'm saying that shouldn't even exist. We don't want programs. We want equality. We don't want it increments. We want absolute, total equality. Or are we American citizens or not? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Why should be given to us in pieces as opposed to just flipping the switch and saying equality? That's what we.
Well, like some of these programs and things that we do instead of equality or equal opportunity is the proper word, I think. Actually, are almost insults to the black culture.
Agreed.
Because you shouldn't have to have charity. You just want an opportunity. Absolutely. Let me have the same chance. I find equality be a dangerous word in any color, because nobody's equal to anybody. We're all equal. We should have equal opportunity, but we're not all equal. Some are smarter, some have more money, some are better looking. You know what I mean? So it's like.
Well, let's be clear about what equality, what we mean by that. We don't.
Yeah, that's again defined.
Yeah, we're not all the same.
Right.
Equality, equal under the law. The Constitution says some things.
Okay.
And what it says is that all of people are equal, presumed to be equal, right, in terms of their humanity, and also the rights that we have as U.S. citizens. Right. We all have a right to liberty, the pursuit of happiness and prosperity and all that.
Right.
Equality. The government, the Constitution gives us and presumes to give us all equal treatment.
Okay.
It's not saying that we're all the same.
We're not all going to get the same results.
That's right. That's okay, because
we all need the same opportunity.
Listen, there are black people who soar despite the circumstances, not because of any programs.
Right.
They soar and they're outstanding despite all the challenges.
And there are poor white people that have nothing or impoverished.
So all we're talking about is being treated fairly under law, constitutional rights. That's what we mean by equality.
Okay, I like that.
So the legislation changes.
I'm sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
So I was saying the legislation that needs a change is actually not adding more programs. It's actually getting rid of things that cause redlining and all the different disparities.
Exactly.
How do we conquer those things?
Exactly.
Well, a lot of those things get conquered at the voting booth.
Yes.
And which is what you're talking about with legislation and that type of thing.
Yes, and even though I've got some relationships with some Republican legislators and congresspersons and Democrats, and you know what they respond to? Votes, people who engage them. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So if we, so I don't take the position that because he's a Democrat or Republican, I don't speak with him. I don't do business with him.
Right.
He's a person who has power. Whoever in office is a person who has power, and if possible, I live peaceably with that person.
Right.
The scripture lets us to know that we pray for peace, to pray for our leaders, because we want to have peace. So we come together and we'll meet with some legislators, and we'll begin to share with them our hearts, and we'll be able to get others. And as we build a coalition, they will absolutely, better understand our position, and I think we'll be able to change some of their hearts as well.
Right. Agreed.
I was watching I was listening to the interview that CBN did with President Trump over the last couple of days, and you can see basically President Trump basically warning Christians, evangelicals, especially white evangelicals, if you don't put me back in office, this is going to be a result. All the things that they, and it was a threat. You could see it, basically a threat to white evangelicals. You better vote me in. But what I'm saying is, if people like President Trump wants votes besides white evangelicals, all he has to do is really come to Black America and hear them out, and then be willing to do what they need. Whoever is going to speak to the issues, Republican, Democrat, or what, if they're going to follow through with it, they're going to get votes. And a lot of people are Democrat, Republican, all depending on what they want to hear. And sadly, a lot of white evangelicals don't care about the black issues. If they did, they wouldn't just be voting only because of a few issues.
I think also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think also that there are people who just don't want to see, whose aim it is to see, discrimination and racism. That's their goal. That is that they're looking to retain privilege and power. This is really about this. This is why Dr. King was such a threat. This is really more about rich and poor than white people know. It's more about rich and poor than black people know. It's an economic system.
Yes.
And that's why there was the creation of a middle class. The middle class is the sleepy class. They're kind of the sleeping group. They just kind of sit there. They enjoy a certain lifestyle. They have television.
Silent majority.
The silent majority, right? They just kind of sit there, not realizing that they're there as a buffer between rich and poor. And as the middle class continues to contract, you'll begin to see some middle class people who are now becoming poorer will begin to realize something is wrong with this, right? Some of them will in a knee-jerk fashion blame it on blacks, Mexicans. Somebody caused this problem other than the rich. For some reason, most people who are poor and middle class people seem to defend the rights of the rich to absolutely abuse the system. It wasn't poor people or immigrants who took jobs across the water, who closed factories in America and went across the water. It was wealthy Americans who did that. They took the jobs away, and then they use politicians and they use whatever other ways of communication and propaganda to make people think, white people in particular, think that all this happened because of these immigrants or someone else. These immigrants had nothing to do with it. They were not even here. They came because the middle class Americans who used to have jobs that paid more money were simply unwilling to do some of the more grunt work for lesser pay. So those same wealthy people brought in immigrants. Do you think that immigrants would come across the border 30 years ago if the powerful American government did not want that to happen? It absolutely was a plan, because wealthy people who have farms and so forth and whatever, they wanted, in essence, almost slave labor. That's why they went and took their business overseas, because they didn't want to pay middle class wages anymore. So, and then they leave us here fighting with each other as if we caused the problems. We didn't cause the problems, and that is the greatest fear right now. And you begin to see, I think when you begin to see black and whites coming together, I think there's a reality that some people do have. It's not just about just a race issue. It's not about black people's problems either. It's also, there are white people who realize we get the same problems.
Yes.
So we have the same problem, so we need to come together to address it, and that's the greatest threat to the power system. And there are people who don't get that. They think it's about race and that kind of thing. They think they're safe. You're not safe. You're next.
Not at all. Not at all. It's a money system. And in the end, follow the money trail.
Absolutely.
I agree.
It's 3%. 3% of the population. If 97, the rest of us, 97%, would just join together, we got, we'll destroy
and
it.
3% of every top of every mountain makes all the decisions for that mountain. The answer, or one of the answers to fix this, is we've got to get godly men and women into these different mountains and get them out of the church and into the mountains so they can change those mountains.
I teach a lesson. I've taught a lesson in the past, which I will visit sometime. The lesson is called the third power. I talk about three arenas of power: money power, people power, and the power of God. And the reality is, people who have money use their money. The wealthy use their money to leverage and control things. The only thing that people who don't have money have to combat the wealthy is organizing people. So when people come together and are organized, that's the only way you can overtake the money.
Right.
You can overtake the powerful and correct the system, because people who have power and have money and have privilege, they're not interested in sharing it with me or you.
Mm-hmm.
They may give you enough just to keep you at bay. You understand? And keep you happy. So you get a mortgage, you get a car, you get a two and a half children, you get a picket fence, you get a television, and you get the ball games on the weekend, and you're happy. Meanwhile, they are taking all they can get, and they're giving you the fag and apple pie.
This is another whole arena you're talking about now, because we don't really have capitalism. We have savage capitalism.
Yes.
And capitalism is a nice system, but it takes godly men and women to work capitalism. Because we didn't have godly men and women only doing these things, we now have savage capitalism, where a CEO will make, $20 million and doesn't want to give a 25 cents an hour raise to the worker.
Mm-hmm.
That's savage. That's the kind of thing. But then the other extreme is people want to go to Marxism or socialism because of the savage capitalism. No, we've got to learn how to work capitalism. It's the best system, but not when it goes off the rails like we did here.
Pastor Josh, you want to read a couple more of those Facebook? We have several comments.
Yeah, Sharon Williams is sharing a lot here. Evangelist Beverly Smith says, rich get richer and the poor get poorer, so if Trump pay taxes as everyone else, it would be fair. So true. And Sharon Williams said, God's people have to take a stand together, all races. If we're afraid, change will not take place. Together we stand strong in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And Deacon Hawks said it starts at the voting booth, locally and nationality, school board, etc. But it really starts with change of minds, hearts. But it got to go further than that too. It's often there's not a lot of choices to who we vote for regarding what they're going to do. We have to demand that they do what's. Demand that they do what's right. We need to demand that that we're heard and that they're going to put together what is needed for our country to be in a better place.
Evangelist Beverly Bell Smith says the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So if Trump paid taxes as everyone else, it would be fair. Not so Trump or the rich.
And if you listen to what Trump said about that, he said, "Listen, I just did what they allowed me to do. You would do it, I would do it. We've got to change laws. That's the bottom line. Absolutely. Otherwise, he's not breaking the law."
Well, yeah, it's not breaking the law at all, and because I don't want to.
The laws are made for the rich, by the rich. Okay, and that
should be a law right there. You cannot be president if you don't pay your taxes, because it's like if the guy on top doesn't pay his taxes.
Well, anyway,
so that just got to be legislated.
This has been a refreshing conversation. I think it opens a door for us to continue. And as I've said, when I get back in town the next week or two, I want to get with you and we could three of us and some others that I'm talking with get together, and we got some people that who got ideas, and we're going to begin to bring some of those ideas, to bring some structure to it, and some organization to it, and it'll make tremendously more powerful. And I thank you, Pastor Josh, for for partnering with me to do this. It's been a blessing sharing with you and your ministry. I know that they love me. Once they understood and and heard my heart.
They love you now. I've been working on them. They love you now, all of them. Definitely those of darker complexion already loved you, but now both are starting to love you. They get it. They get it. I got it. I had it. I knew where you were coming from. I knew what you were doing, and it was needed. Just took a while.
Yeah. But it's been
listen. You just from my white perspective, when you use that word systemic racism, you've got to explain it.
Yes.
You've got to tell them, look, I can't do this, you can do this. I can't do this, you can do this. And then eyes will start to say, really? You can't do that?
Yeah, and I've said that over and over again, and you've just never heard it.
No, I didn't.
So it just takes time. It takes time. Right?
Yeah.
The other word has been used a lot has been white privilege. A lot of people struggling with what that really is. And I've heard a lot of African Americans sharing that there really is no white privilege, and some putting a lot of their opinions out there, which is very odd.
A better word for white privilege would be white opportunity. There's millions of poor white people, but they have opportunity. They just didn't make it, or didn't want to work hard enough, or didn't want to give it a shot, whatever. But not all white people are privileged. But we have opportunity to be privileged that you don't have.
So think of the white person that you know who is the least privileged, and then think that black people are less privileged than that.
Well, not all black people, but yes. Well, again, you may not have the opportunities that we have. So for a white person to be poor or impoverished, it doesn't necessarily mean they didn't have opportunities that you don't have.
Right, and that's kind of my point. But anyway, we don't even want to kind of begin to compare the black and the white and the poor, but because we're all in it together, and it's about getting people to understand that we're in different places, and that's okay. But we all need to come to understand better, particularly the Christians, to understand. God has called us to as people, and we should love everyone and absolutely be willing to fight for all people who are oppressed and fight against all oppression, and that means speaking against the oppressors. And I think next time, at some point, Josh, we will get into some scripture and talk about some just scriptural teachings about some of this to help Christians better understand it from a Christian perspective.
Amen. And
well, thanks for having me, guys.
Well, thank you so much for being.
Thank you, Pastor Andy.
Good to
next
see you.
Week we're going to have
get together in a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir.
Yes, bless you, Pastor Andy. Next week our guest is supposed to be Bishop Joseph Matera, who is more in the white evangelical, and should be good to have him on. He's in the national forefront, so tune in next Wednesday at 5 o'clock.
We're going to reschedule Bishop Harry Jackson. He's going to be an exciting guest. And we've got some local pastors as well. We've got Pastor Gary Melton will be with us. We've got Pastor Kyle Huber. And we've got some others that we're speaking with. And it's going to be just a great conversation. We appreciate all of you for being there on Facebook, both on Facebook and on radio. We appreciate you so much. Thank you, WEHA, for being there and getting this word out. All right, love you guys. Listen, appreciate you so much. Love you both, pastors. God bless you. We'll
Take care. God bless you. Love you.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Love you.
Thank you so much. All right.
God bless.
WEHA, we appreciate you. Deacon Hawks, thank you so much. I know you're on there Facebook Live, but we appreciate you for being there and your comments and your contributions. Thank you all. God bless. We'll see you on next week.